Hey everyone, I'm Selena Shang, and I'm a senior PM at Google. Today we have a special guest, Anant, to talk to us about the differences in PM cultures across countries. Anant, do you want to give a quick intro?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anant. I'm a PM. I'm a senior PM at Proton now, and I look after the cloud services. And I've worked in a few countries as a product manager. So I was like, hey, let's chat to Selena about this. And I love telling dad jokes, and sometimes we laugh.
Hopefully, very few of those today. No, just kidding. Cool. Yeah, thanks for joining another Liftoff episode. Just getting right into it. Maybe a higher level question to start. What's one thing that you think a US based PM would be surprised about EU PM culture? I know you've worked in both London and Switzerland.
Yeah. I mean, there's quite a few things, but I think the thing that jumps to my mind, especially because I'm in Switzerland, is that the government-made apps are really good. Unlike when I was in the US, where government-backed apps, and even when I was in India, aren't generally very user-friendly. But that's not the same here. Or to the extent that you prefer using the local apps over Google Maps and even Apple Maps, etc. So they tend to be more precise. They tend to have better directions and do better connectivity overall. My favorite example is the SBB app, which is the Swiss National Railways, and it takes me from my home to the starting of the hike that I want to do, and it would get me one ticket, which includes the rail, the tram, the bus, even a boat service if required, and to go and do multiple stuff. So that's really amazing. Boiling down to that, because government staff are amazing and there's a lot of public infrastructure, one thing that jumped out to me, and this was day one when I landed in Geneva, was I got out and I was like, when I get out, I landed on the airport. I got out. I was like, I'm gonna get an Uber, right? And everything is expensive. And so I shell out $50 for 5 kilometers to get to my apartment. And I later realized that you can take the train. It is way, way more convenient, right? Way, way more cheaper. Actually, when I came to Geneva, you would get an 80-minute train pass for free if you were stepping off an international flight. And I did not know that. They have since stopped that because of the pandemic, XYZ, but it was just amazing. So that is one thing that would surprise you when you come here, infrastructure-related stuff, especially government apps, and that also includes taxes. Having done taxes in 4 countries now, I can tell you that tax systems in the European countries are just way, way ahead of the game. They're much more simpler to do. Even though in Switzerland, the tax software we are doing particular stuff is only available in French, German, and Italian. They don't support English, but I could still do it. So that sort of surprises you when you move from US to EU.
That is amazing. Yeah, I can attest. I just went on a national parks trip, and it was very hard to navigate any sort of government app or website about getting permits and all of that. So yeah, you're very lucky. Thanks for that. And sort of in a similar vein, like you mentioned, you have moved around a bunch for work, and so you've had to be a newbie in a bunch of different places. Are there any local sentiments / local cultures that EU PMs need to think about more than if you were US based?
This is my favorite thing, which happens to me every weekend. So there's a cafe near my place, which I absolutely love. It has a backyard, a gorgeous backyard. If you're ever in Geneva, let me know. I will give you the directions to it. And I go there and I order the exact same thing. It's a slice of chocolate cake and a saffron latte, right? So they know me, they go away, do the same thing. But unlike in the US, there is no tipping culture per se in European countries, right? Generally have extremely high, they have good social benefits, and they have really high basic income or minimum wages. And what happens is when I pay, and I pay with my card, just tap to pay. After they enter my details of what I ordered, they press no tip for me before they hand over the machine for me to pay. It exists because the software is built by Europe, a US tech company, which they use to process their payments, and tipping is a big part of the culture in US and how everything works. So it's just there, and there's no way for them to remove it. So it's an actual US user friction because they have to take the machine, press no tip, and then give it back to me on the counter. That's something that kind of differentiates on how you would think. which also means that if you're designing software or products within EU, you might have to realize that a lot of the base products that are used by companies and users in Europe are still US based. So even if you have cultural sentiments and ways of how things work, which are classically European, some of that supply chain or user flow would have a lot of American company aspects to them. It's kind of saying, oh, this thing exists because in the US it's like this, and US obviously dominates in terms of a lot of technology companies and technology services. So they export some of these culture and user flows outside, even if they don't really work well in that place.
Got it.
The other thing is going to be consumer protections. The bane of every EU PM's existence is GDPR. And you get a lot of like acceptance from people and be like, oh, this and that. And then this is also where I've seen probably the maximum use of dark UX patterns in the world.
For like accepting.
Yeah, GDPR thing. So it's like the accept all is green and the accept only necessary is just doesn't even look like. Right. So that's the one thing, especially when you go in the US, and not just US, right? Like India and other places as well, you don't really have those prompts up front. And the privacy concerns are slightly different than getting them to go through all of this extra
Got it.
checks.
Makes sense. And yeah, even in the US, I'm sure PMs are definitely impacted by GDPR, so can empathize. Going back to what you said about like the tipping culture and just like the platform not being able to support flexibility there. Out of curiosity, so it sounds like, say, payment platforms are still, outsourced to like US companies. Are there any sort of like other platforms in your daily life that European tech companies still sort of are able to provide for locals?
Two things come to mind. So one is a Swiss-only payment infrastructure is called Twint. Every Swiss bank and every grocery store and every merchant, including your tourist guide, will support Twint. And basically it works, you can either show a QR code on your phone and you scan with your Twint app and you can just pay, or you can use a phone number and pay. It's really helpful. It basically connects to whatever bank you have, and it's just seamless. And it has a really high transfer limit. So I think it's a few thousand. So you can basically get a lot, basically buy an Apple iPhone or anything you want with it. Easy peasy. The other one would be Clarenda, which is as in a European company, right? And they have the whole, I mean, if I'm wrong, if Clarenda not a European company, it's going to look stupid, but okay. I'm pretty sure it's a European company. Yeah. But yeah, so they have built infrastructure, which is just European, it's built and made in Europe, which has slight differences than what I have noticed when you're trying to use American-based technology or even Indian-based like payment systems. India has a thing called UPI, it's called Universal Payment Interface, which allows you to transfer between banks without any extra costs. So there are a few things, and homegrown systems definitely advantages. So yeah, that what I would say is different. The tipping one, I have never found a good counterexample to that. That just seems to it hits me in the face every Saturday and Sunday. So.
Yeah. No, that's so funny. And I guess if any Square or Stripe, I don't know what what vendor it is, if any of you PMs are listening, take that as a feature request. Cool. Yeah, that's a good example. And sort of maybe changing gears to like your work culture. Are there any notable differences in industry? Like we sort of talked about like how different industries might seep into, EU culture. Are there any notable differences in the industries that might impact the like quote unquote type of PM that a company is looking for?
So this is based on, obviously, I don't have statistically significant data or examples to prove this is the case. But when I applied for a product role within London, when I moved to US, and as a part of visa application, you have to basically apply again for a role.
Mm-hmm.
I applied again to Geneva as a PM. And I was like, a few more applications here and there. One thing that stood out to me was that the US job descriptions for product managers would focus more on, which I would say that's what they're hiring for, business strategy, innovation kind of aspects of it, because they expect the PM to run the product overall, right? They have to make the financial decisions and how to market X, Y, Z. Whereas in Europe, I found that there's a little bit more focus on execution. People expect PM to come in and execute on an established vision that is probably given to them by the board or their higher up management chain, and they're supposed to execute. And so you would see stuff like both on people who are applying to this job in their CVs, but also in the job description, stuff like Scrum certification, right? Which you would rarely ever see in a US company's job description. So that is one thing that I've kind of found, like it's more innovation driven, more find user problems, solve them, versus like, hey, we know the problem is what the company's supposed to do. Now we just need to execute stuff. So that's a bit of a difference.
Got it. And before you get to your second part, just a follow up there. So if in Europe it's more like Scrum and execution focused and less of like the overall strategy and like financial decisions, like what role like supplements that work? Because it's still important. So if the PM's not doing it, who is doing it?
I think that's where GMs, directors of like the growth people would probably do that more. Like one aspect of this is also seen as like there's a lot more POs in openings in Europe than I've ever seen in the US job market, which is like, again, I feel like there's a lot of execution-based roles here versus a lot of innovation-based roles, which I feel are more common in the US. Again, there's a bias here, which is I basically looked at all the big tech companies when I was in the US, right? So they obviously tend to favor innovation and they think about product a little bit differently than other people in the world, because product management as a like job is still a little bit vague. Like everyone has their own definition. So yeah, but definitely is a bit of an execution focus. And I can say that with that part, I can say with a little more certainty, because as I'm hiring for my team here, right, I'm looking for more, like, I want to understand, have you built a business before? Have you like driven products, like, and talk about the business aspects of a product, the team aspects of a product, the cultural aspect of a product, and not just like, oh, I solved this problem, I get up and I join the Scrum ceremonies and I help people estimate tickets, right? Which is what I get when I review resumes here a little more. Not that there's on both sides. Like I've also seen such resumes in the US when hiring, but it seems a little bit more of that in Europe.
Got it. Makes sense. Did you have a second part you wanted to touch on, or was that okay?
Yeah. So the thing about, I felt like maybe the reason why this happens is because of, I won't say lack, because that exists, but a less refined or less established product manager, a product manager culture and a pipeline of generating product managers who think more in terms of user problems, think more in terms of innovation. And that, I think, comes down to AEPM programs. Like almost all the amazing PM that I've met have been APM at some point, including you. But like what I've seen, and again, I was in Yahoo US, and I got to join as an intern because Yahoo did not have essentially an APM program in outside of the US. And I felt the same for a lot of companies. Like, one of our mutual friends, Ryan, has this, you have an APM list website, will have all the APM programs. And I've seen that multiple times. And it rarely ever used to have a European-based APM program. And I felt because it doesn't have that APM program, it means that it's very hard for people to break into product directly, which means most people who enter product are engineers, which obviously means they lean more towards engineering ceremonies and leans more toward execution, right? Instead of people who they might have CS degrees, that's fine. But if they join and they're coached to think a little more broadly from a business perspective, that doesn't exist here yet.
Got it.
That's, I think, is kind of the reason why the first thing happens.
It's so true. Yeah, it's a good observation. And even if you are in like an APM or an RPM, it's because you are like hosted by a US based company like Meta, and then you rotate to London or, whatever. So that's such a good point. The APM program was like so formative for me and, definitely so helpful. But if you don't have that, like, I'm curious, in other places you lived, how has the role of universities played into product culture, if at all?
Almost none of these universities have a product management stream, right? So you have computer science, you have electrical engineering, material science and whatnot, but no one has product management. And I'm not counting online courses. Having said that, some of the US universities, like I know for a fact that Stanford, for example, has a product management course. So it's not a full degree in product management, but you can at least take a 4 credit, I think it's ASL 305 or something course, which teaches product management, right? It's only for master's student, as I understand, but it's there. Right? So I feel like given, and I'm guessing it's a factor that a lot of these people, even though they have computer science degrees, are going into product management to all these like top companies which surround this Bay Area in particular. They have started developing, they're listening to the industry like, oh, they are hiring for these roles, but they're hiring people who have a little bit different skill set than what this role would probably require in the future. And they've started to adapt. I feel like some of the universities, especially in the Bay Area, have realized that. And I think that's because of the fact that it's Stanford, some billion-dollar VC firm like Anderson Horowitz or something, and then, Apple campus, right? So like, oh, we're just going to talk to each other. We're going to like make sure, what we need is what we are coaching the next generation for. And I think that exists because of proximity there and just because of how many people go there. But that doesn't exist in other places. Like I haven't seen that happen. And that's where I feel there's an impact on universities, per se, not the university itself, but the proximity that university has to venture capital firms and companies. I think London is close, but London is still like, it's Cambridge and then London. It's still an hour train ride.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you forgot an important campus there. I'm just joking. I resonate a lot with that.
There, so, okay.
No, I resonate a lot with that. It's so true because, when I started school, I studied EECS and I was like, oh, I'm just going to be an engineer. And the only reason I ever knew PM existed was because I just sort of heard it around campus, and like just because of the proximity to other companies that had APM programs and like PM internships, that's the only way I learned about it. And so if I went to school anywhere else in the United States, I don't know if I would. So I do definitely feel grateful that I was just like around where the action is happening. So totally resonate with that. I would be curious to hear your take on the differences between Bay Area versus Europe VC culture, because as you know, VC culture has such a huge impact on product culture. Any differences you notice that, you think listeners would be interested in hearing?
The amount of VC money that is spent in the US just outstrips everyone else by like an order of magnitude, more or less, right? So I think it's like 3 times of Europe spending is done in the US. So it's like significantly larger. Mm-hmm. Which again, I think would probably impact, will have a snowball effect, right? So if you have more money, that means you get more talent, which means you get more innovation, which means you get more money, which means you get more talent. It just goes on and on, right? But having said that, the thing that I've realized, at least I felt having worked with people who have worked directly with VCs, is there is like measuring stuff by stock market valuations and measuring growth in that way seems to be a very capitalistic kind of way of thinking, which is dominant in the US, right? Nothing wrong with it. It does lead to more innovation. No one else is sending rocketed week to space compared to US, right? But in Europe, what I felt is it's more profitability first, and it's more overall growth as an impact to society first. There's a slight difference there. Again, I'm not going to say it's like a completely opposite, but just enough for you to notice that. Every VC I've talked to, every board meeting part that I've been on or had the privilege of listening to, is always in profitability first. Like burning cash to grow market share doesn't really work well within Europe. And that has influenced how VCs approach stuff. And obviously comes down to the fact that the LTV of a European user is lower than an American user, right? Like people spend more in the US compared to people, how much they spend in Europe. Even though in terms of standard of living and purchasing power, they might be similar, but the culture is different. Like in Swiss, like saving money is a big thing, even though they're one of the richest countries in the world, right? When the US is like spending more money, right? Like I was reading this book about economics book, like Good Economics for Hard Times, I think it's called. And it talks about that how US has like 3-ish times the credit card debt of an average European country,
Wow.
right? So they are spending more, which means that you can make more money there because you spend more. And that I think has influenced how these allocate their funding, but also what kind of projects they tend to fund, right? So if you're funding a project where to burn a lot of cash, you might not want to do that in Europe because the LTV of a user is not going to be that high, right? So those kind of things come into picture at some point. It's my argument. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, culturally, that makes sense. Like it maps, it checks out. It reminds me of sort of just like differences in like philosophy and like design culture and things like that. Like, you know, one of the first things you learn as like an APM, you go on your trip or whatever, they take you you go to Asia and you learn about the differences in like information density on Asian websites compared to the US. Like you look at, you know, Yahoo Japan and it's like crunched, but that's normal, right? For that market. Is there anything you know, similar in that vein that you've noticed between the US and Europe?
Yeah, or the Yahoo Japan thing, yeah, always gets me.
Yeah.
Also, the super app culture is very unique to Asia, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps outside of Asia. So into the design, the thing that stood out to me, and I'm going to try my best to explain this, but just bear with me, is that Europe seems to be more design-centered in terms of it's more bespoke. Like things are not built to scale. You know, like you look at the top 10 European companies by market value, right? Like 3 of them are luxury vendors, right? The second richest, or maybe the most richest person in the world, they go back and forth stock price value, is the owner of Louis Vuitton Group, right? So you see the fact that there are a lot of designer companies in Europe, also backed up by the fact that almost all the sports cars, which are again more bespoke in design, they're not designed to be scaled, are European, right? Lamborghini, Koenigsegg, I'm probably mispronounced that. It's a Swedish company.
I have no idea.
Etc. Right? They're all European companies, right? So what I've seen happen is, and the place where you and I could test this out is going to the website of a clothing brand, right? And what I've noticed is when you go to a clothing brand website like Paul Smith or one of those things, which is European, and they tend to, if they're also building the software in-house or European design firm is helping them, it's more visually stunning. They're going to feature on, hey, this is our brands, what we're doing, and we're bespoke, and they're trying to connect. It's not built to scale. Whereas if you go to a US counterpart, and it also happens in India as well, I've seen, is that it's more like buy stuff now, right? They would experiment with like buttons, like the color of the buy button, right? So like optimize that thing that people press it, buy more stuff. Whereas in European countries, like explore. I mean, the one thing that frustrates me the most is that in Europe, in all these European brands, I find it so hard to filter things when I buy, especially clothes and stuff. They're like, no, we wanted to like look at the gallery. It's like a catwalk or runway.
Yeah, immersive experience.
Yeah, not like I know what I want. I want to buy a white T-shirt. No, look at everything. Right. So that's the thing I've seen. I mean, I won't say one is more better design or the other better design is like design for different principles. One is designed to be more bespoke, and they're like, we don't need to grow, we don't need to sell 100 million. We sell enough to, get through a day and, make a good brand. And obviously one part is that scarcity of these things actually increases the brand value for them. Right? Like Louis Vuitton and stuff, they never go on sale. Right? So as that's the whole point, right? Whereas on the other side, I felt like it's more like how much more can we sell? So they optimize for more of the average, which feels more human-centric. It's more friction less in terms of just the process. You're like, oh, here's my filter, I can select what I want and buy stuff. That's a design philosophy difference I've noticed. I found it very hard to quantify, even though I tried to look up in the past on research for this. But I just talked about designers. Like one will always start with the UX and one will always start with the UI. And I thought it was interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah, more like the product design versus like the visual design, you're saying. Got it. Interesting. I think it's so funny when you mention, like say US fashion, it's more for like the middle ground. It's like you win some, you lose some, because you can always find something that like, works, but you go to the store and it's all like neutral shades, black, tan, white, and you go, you travel in like Paris or whatever, and you're like more, more out there, and like, it's not going to work for everybody, but it might work, for you. So it's hard and easy to shop in the US at the same time, and then hard and easy to shop in Europe at the same time. So
horrible. I mean, I prefer the US for my everyday stuff. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I wear about the same t-shirt, like let me buy 5 of them.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Anant, he wears a white t-shirt every day, or a black one if he's feeling out there, right? But yeah, that makes sense. And then
I kid you not, I want to call this out. So when I buy t-shirts, I buy like in a bunch at once.
Yeah,
it makes sense. But that buy button on the website I buy it from has an animation on it, so I can't just tap. No. Tap. It does this fill animation. It will go back. It looks amazing, but it's not built to buy more. Like it works fine if you just want to buy one. If I have to buy more, I have to tap and I have to wait for it to, then I have to tap again. And I'm like, come on.
That's so funny. Some Amazon PM is like, yeah, they just sneezed. Makes sense. Maybe to wrap and to put you on the spot a little bit, do you have, like, if you could wave a magic wand, which product culture would you want to be working in right now? So you could move anywhere, you could work at any company. Not saying that you want to leave Proton, but in this scenario.
You have to pick one. Like I would like to pick.
Okay, you should pick one, but there can be some nuance in like phase of life and things like that.
I mean, I prefer the European culture. I'll tell you what. Okay, for my reason, it allows for more balance in life. I don't have it because my habits are still completely US centric, right? So I don't wear, the fact that I work 80 hours with like an honor badge. Everyone in the office thinks I'm crazy. But just kidding. They don't think I'm crazy. We're a startup, so everyone is working really hard. But in general, like I talked to some of my other peers who work at more established versions of European companies, and yeah, they do think I'm crazy, right? Because that is it, like, and if you see this as not just a company culture, but as something that is enforced by society's culture, like aspects. So, everyone gets at least 25 holidays, no matter which European country you kind of go to. France gives you 35, right? A lot of countries have this thing where the holidays don't roll forward. So you're basically encouraged to take them. So that's the forcing function. Then, obviously, your costs are much lower, especially when you take into account, I mean, it doesn't help me because I wasn't born here, but if you're a European citizen, your schooling is almost free, right? Your stipend when you do masters are really high. Your healthcare is free to a large extent. And so your costs are low. You're not under the duress in terms of like, having to pay for a lot of stuff. and the culture is around like taking time off and, enjoying life. So yeah, the reason I would prefer this because I have that option. If I do that, people will be like, oh, cool, welcome to the normal. In the US, if you do that, it's a little bit more hustle first.
Yeah. I guess in this wave a magic wand scenario, we also have to wave away your workaholic tendencies.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining. I always enjoy these. And for those who are watching, thanks for tuning in, and let us know what other topics you want to talk about.